Peter Thiel is talking about the Antichrist. He gave lectures on it. Tickets cost like $200. The media clipped out the part where he said that Greta Thunberg might be a legionnaire of the Antichrist, and then they all just basically said, wow, look at Peter Thiel being weird again. I wonder if they had to replace the boy whose blood they have pumped into his body, and so his internal chemistry got zonked out for a little bit. And then they kind of just moved on. The media treated Peter Thiel's obsession with the apocalypse as just another little quirk of his. Thiel, to them, has all these odd, disconnected idiosyncrasies that give occasion for incredulous news reports and perhaps snarky posts. This is just the new one, added to the list with Seasteading, Rene Girard, vampiricism, harping on and on about technological stagnation. But I don't think that these are actually strictly individual quirks, idiosyncrasies. Sure, Peter Thiel is a weird person who takes things to weird places, but each of those things on that list, they're peculiar versions of things that are widespread. He's a particular person, but these aren't very particular urges or ideas. And they aren't disconnected. Seasteading, the quest to live forever, referencing intellectually indexterous French theorists, they're all part of a bundle. They're connected, they reinforce each other, and they come from the same source. It's something that imperils all of us. Of course, I want to just blame capitalism for poisoning all of our minds, bodies, and souls, but I think it's at least one step more complicated than that. It's more like we have these ugly habits of mind and soul that capitalism sprang out of, and then capitalism just makes those worse. Capitalism is a poison, yes, but it's a poison distilled from things inside of us. Thiel is an ultra-capitalist, but in his exaggeration, he shows us what's in store for all of us. He isn't an aberration. He's a prediction. Peter Thiel is a warning. Peter Thiel's been going on for a long time about technical stagnation. The last 50 years, we've had advances in computers and now smartphones, but not much else. The world that people foresaw in the 50s and 60s hasn't come to pass. Jet planes fly at the same speed today as they did in 1967. Roads and cars, maybe they've undergone aesthetic changes, but we still get around in basically the same way that we did when LBJ was president. Some houses are bigger and styles are different, but we haven't substantively changed the way that we live. It's all summed up in his motto. We were promised flying cars. What we got was 140 characters. And Peter Thiel blames the culture. It's this thing that conservatives and libertarians do. I'm going to call Peter Thiel a libertarian. I don't like that word. I don't like how we use it. I don't think it's a good description of what they are. American libertarians are this odd breed of libertarian where they oppose liberation. And there are other types of libertarian that are cool. Libertarian socialists are people who understand, some of the few people who understand that one of the biggest obstacles between us and socialism is big government. But libertarian, the way that we use it, it's just how people use it in America. It might be confusing if I call Peter Thiel something else. He calls himself a libertarian. So I will bite the bullet and just call him a libertarian. But it's this thing that conservatives and libertarians do, where cultures only exist in proximity to the economy when they want to blame the failures of an economy on a culture. To them, the economy is this freestanding thing with its own laws that can be modeled with formulas that look like things you'd be taught in physics class. The economy is this independent, naturally occurring thing. Supply and demand are like laws of the universe. To them, it's as if capitalism wasn't created, it was discovered. We just had to remove the shackles of feudalistic and pre-feudalistic mistakes, and then capitalism was, to use a word that they like, unleashed. Capitalism is its own pure thing, unless an economy is sluggish. It's only when they want to say that an economy is being held back by a culture that they'll acknowledge that an economy is embedded in a culture. We can't explain the outcomes of black people in America and why they lag behind white people, so it's got to be a problem with black culture, laziness, criminality, welfare dependency, all of that stuff. For Peter Thiel, there's something like this going on with the relative stagnation of technological development. It can be blamed on risk aversion, a decadence in our culture where we lost our sense of definite purpose and definite goals all at once. In his book Zero to One, Thiel has this Punnett square matching optimism versus pessimism and definition versus indefinition. America in the 50s and the post-war boom was both definite and optimistic. But since the 70s or 80s, while we've remained optimistic, we've become indefinite. China is definite but pessimistic. Europe is indefinite and pessimistic. Just like the whole continent. China is definite and pessimistic, just as one. There's all a whole culture. There's just one abiding vibe for the whole place. What happened to America is you just spontaneously started having bad vibes in 1971. TV and movies started to be anti-science. The Simpsons vilify nuclear power. We've been doomed ever since. But I mean, if any of that is remotely true, if your future can be defeated by Butterfinger spokes cartoons, how robust was your future to begin with? Sometimes Thiel will talk about diversity initiatives obstructing progress. And again, if your future could be destroyed by HR departments. But there is an explanation for why American innovation petered out that doesn't have recourse to such incredibly unrigorous cultural stereotypes. The post-war boom happened at a time when Western Europe was destroyed by World War II. But then we pumped a lot of money back into Western Europe to stave off communism, and quickly we started to lose our competitive advantage and our trade surplus went away. Add to that a jump in government spending in the 60s for things like the Vietnam War and the ensuing inflation, and quickly the Bretton Woods monetary system became unworkable. So Nixon got rid of the Bretton Woods Agreement in 1971. I chose that number earlier for a reason. The 1950s had been a time of pretty tight economic controls and outright centralized planning. The early Silicon Valley entrepreneurs that Peter Thiel always shouts out, they were military industry guys. But with the end of Bretton Woods, international economic controls were dissolved. Individual countries were free to, say, deregulate their financial sectors, allowing new financial instruments to be invented. So now finance is where the money is. Peter Thiel once wondered why rocket scientists went from inventing rockets in the 50s to applying for jobs as quants in the 90s, and it's because the government neoliberalized the financial sector. When Peter Thiel, the libertarian who rails against government bureaucracy, is complaining about the move from science and technology to derivatives and futures trading, he's lamenting the end of economic controls and centralized planning. He's lamenting the effects of what happens when the government gets out of the way of business people. And I think that's neat. I like that. That's cool. And giving an explanation based on the actual political economy and not esoteric cultural shifts could lead Peter Thiel to a real plan for how to change things. It's not, we just need to get more racist and sexist again, or we just need Rick and Morty to teach people about the importance of tech research. But no, I mean, obviously he's just going to keep watching this flounder, waiting semi-helplessly as things just get worse. He's been talking about this for 15 years at least, and he's still just talking about it. He is, very reasonably, not that impressed by the prospects of AI. He said that it could result in like a 1% increase in our GDP every year, which is hardly like all that consequential. It's certainly nothing like the radical transformation of our entire physical environment that he's been so impatient for. And like, what else is there? Thiel has said, quote, "Stagnation leads directly to apocalypse. Things aren't improving, economic growth halts, so people's standards of living aren't getting better over time anymore. Maybe they're even getting worse, so people get restive. They begin to lose faith in the idea of modern progress, and eventually they stop believing in it altogether. And now they have to reach for more atavistic ways of being and thinking that make everything even worse, and the world just comes undone." And maybe Peter Thiel's personal fixation on the stagnation of technological development is not shared by that many other people. But it's a version of the general modern-day capitalist mania for constant growth, just on a bigger scale. He complains about stagnation because his expectations of growth have been frustrated. And Peter Thiel's example shows us the outcome of this mania for constant growth. Apocalyptic thinking is the same shape as scheming together unicorn startups. It's hockey stick shaped graphs just pointing upwards or pointing down. The flip side of the uncreative inertia of stagnation is the destructive chaos of, the book of Revelations. And in the same way, the growth mindset is haunted by premonitions of Armageddon, personal and possibly worldwide. As long as we dream of endless growth, we'll just be condemning ourselves to live in the leftover dread of our nightmares of total ruin, like Peter Thiel. The famous story of how Peter Thiel came to invest in Facebook so early goes something like, everyone in Silicon Valley, everyone at Facebook, they were always talking about bringing people together, connecting the world. But Peter Thiel, he saw the reality. Facebook, all of these websites, social media, it was going to eviscerate us, disconnect people, tear them apart, make them dumber, less thoughtful. It would be an envy machine that ruined us, as individuals and as a society. So he bought in. Peter Thiel knew how horrible it would be, and that's why he invested. Thiel had portensions of the dying of the light, and he didn't rage against it. He found a way to make money off of the darkness. Disgusting stuff. Just putrid morally. And while business people and tech people will bow down at the altar of Peter Thiel's prognosticatorial prowess, this was a pretty obvious prediction. This massive web of inhuman connections, of course it would just make life worse. I foresaw that. And I was like 14 when Facebook got started. And I didn't need a trash literary critic to think it through for me. But Peter Thiel did. Specifically, he followed Rene Girard in his thinking. Girard's one idea is that all desire is mimetic. We learn to want, we learn what to want only by looking at what other people have and what other people want. And then, because these things are scarce, we fight over them. Now, I want to emphasize that Girard isn't saying that envy is an important thing or that envy moves people a lot and that we should be mindful of envy when we're reading. We should be mindful of envy when we're trying to interpret texts, that maybe we have underemphasized envy sometimes. No, Girard is saying that all desire is mimetic, and that's where violence comes from. And we should be reading all books and history, politics and anthropology through that idea. Now, there are more like stages to it. There's a whole thing about scapegoating, but there's no reason to worry about the rest of the theory. We're already in dum-dum territory. Because the second that you find a single desire that goes back to an individual taste or attraction, then you've disproven the whole theory. There's this fun paper by Joshua Landy where he goes through all these different ways to show how Girard is wrong. But just to borrow one, Girard says that childhood is the time of imitation, which to a degree is true. Children will, imitate each other. They'll copy their siblings, their neighbors, their cool uncles. They'll, play house and take turns as mommy and daddy. This is one of the main ways that we learn how to be a human, by cribbing off of other people's homework. How hard would it be to invent personhood from the ground up? But no, children don't only imitate. It's not all mimesis. Like Landy says, you can't get a child to eat vegetables just by eating vegetables yourself and expressing your satisfaction. Then even on the off chance that you can momentarily trick them into trying the vegetable, you can't make them like it. Their personal taste kicks in. They just go back to demanding French fries and dino nuggies. Yeah, there. So much for Girard and his overwrought theory. But what kind of person finds Girard appealing? Well, for one, maybe somebody who's not terribly well read, though he might want people to think that he is, people to think that he's smart. Girard can be so obnoxious to read if you know the books that he's talking about. He goes off on Proust, and I have epigenetic memories of Nordic book burnings flood into me. But if you haven't read Proust or Shakespeare or Dostoevsky, then he reads them for you. Now it's like you've read Proust and Hamlet and Crime and Punishment all at once just by reading this one book. Like that joke in Metropolitan where the main character says that he likes to read literary criticism instead of novels because when you read literary criticism, you get the novel and the literary critic both at the same time. You know the novels now and you can make thoughtful sounding pronouncements on them in public. Girard is, I think, like a one-volume compendium of cliff notes for people. And then there's the theory itself, like the psychology of it, how inhuman you see people. Because to be human is to be stochastic, to be inexplicable, have an idea that just comes to you. You can't trace it back to any one definite starting spot. Some ideas, some urges, instincts, hopes, wants that just come unbidden, seemingly spontaneously. But in Girard, we're just automatons of imitation, or maybe like reflections in a mirror. People have no more depth than glass. And then society is just a bunch of mirrors set in front of each other. It's like a carnival hall of mirrors. Peter Thiel found this theory appealing. Apparently, this is how he sees people. And you can see how this kind of thinking would associate with commerce. You don't appreciate the full interiority of people, so you get rich off of them. And now, your riches depend on not appreciating the full interiority of people, so you get even worse. Like I said, capitalism is born from ugly habits of mind and soul, and then it just intensifies them. And maybe there's an end to what you would take from fellow humans, but not from the envy robots who happen to surround you. And so Girard slides easily into the capitalist craze for endless growth and endlessly increasing profits. There's that famous clip where Peter Thiel is talking to Ross Douthat, and Douthat asks if humanity should survive, and Peter Thiel stutters for like 12 seconds, because why would he care if humanity survives? And finally, there are obvious ways that Girard dovetails into apocalypticism. We're all fighting for the same things, and if those things get more scarce, then there'll be more violence. And more violence means it'll be harder to produce and distribute those things, so there'll be even more violence. It's a death spiral. But of course, people fighting over scarce resources, that's not unique to Girard's theory. What is maybe a little bit particular to Girard's theory is seeing people as automatons, people as cause and effect machines. The wrong inputs, and there's nothing to stop them from whizzing out. Wrong inputs, there's nothing to stop them from destroying the world. Eternal life is an idea that we get from childhood, a hope that we get from childhood. Childhood is timeless. Children pass their days blithely unconcerned with time. I don't mean just numerical time, the regular counting of the clock, but the deeper experience of time, the sense of living in time, of every moment being bound up, shuntered, the constriction of ourselves that we hold so that we can travel aerodynamically down the track of time. As adults, the rare privileged moments of being that we have, the few happy, weighty, charged moments, we get caught up and lose all track of time. Art can shock us into timelessness. Art, which has always had a special connection to childhood and which exists itself in a kind of never always. Art, but any kind of drunkenness. In sobriety achieved however it's achieved. The stretches where we're traveling forward, yes, but not along a track, or at least we don't feel the track. We don't feel ourselves jerk against the metal as we're battered straight. We don't feel it, so we stop expecting it. So we can quit, if only for a brief moment, bracing ourselves for it. Baudelaire's injunction, enivrez-vous, be drunk, is, among other things, an invitation to be free of time. But these privileged moments of being, why don't they just go on forever? It feels like that should be in the logic of the thing. Unbounded moments that feel like they're just one prolonged jolt. They're paradoxically brief experiences of infinity, a temporary sense of eternity. Their very nature teaches us to expect an infinity that doesn't end, an eternal life of eternity. You could just freeze yourself. We know that Peter Thiel was interested in cryogenics and the possibility of like freezing yourself, freezing your body until medical science gets to the point where it can eliminate aging and death, then you get unfrozen, and you live without aging and live without death. Like, I think that's what they were trying to do with Ted Williams' body. I don't know that that's what Thiel's done. I don't know if he has like a outstanding contract with any of the cryogenic labs that supposedly offered that service. We do know that he's given several millions of dollars to research related to it, and a bunch of other attempts at immortality. Famously, there was that thing about blood sharing. They did research with mice and saw if, like, you gave an old mouse the blood from a younger mouse, if that would make the old mouse healthy and active again. Parabiosis. Though, if Peter Thiel ever took part in that treatment, he has, it seems, stopped giving funding to it. Nevertheless, his support for immortality research is in the tens of millions of dollars, and that's just the stuff that is publicly known. The obsession with immortality is like the height of human morbidity. What separates humans from the other animals isn't that we know about death and we know about our own deaths. It's that we try to escape from death. But obsessing over death, trying to overcome death, spending millions of dollars on research about it, and supposedly sapping teenagers of their blood in order to stave off death, that's exactly the opposite of what we need to do. If we try to surmount death, we just subsume ourselves to it. We train our focus and time and attention and resources on death, not life. Like I said in my J.K. Rowling video, when we try to flee from death, we only achieve a flight from life. Or, to put it another way, one of the oldest abiding truths of our stories, of our myths, is that you become the thing that you fight against. If you fight against death, then you become like death. The morbid quest for longevity, it only gets us a long death, a death in life. There's that Eliot line, only through time, time is conquered. I mean, I have plenty of quibbles with the underlying philosophy of the Four Quartets, but I do just love the poetry of it, so I'm going to reappropriate it for my own uses. And what can that anti-Semitic dweeb do about it now? It's only in life, forgetful of death, that we can get over our fear of death. And Peter Thiel is very explicit about his fear of death. It's only in the run of play that we can achieve timelessness, not in the unending stuckedness of eternity. Permanence would smother death, but only by encasing us in marble, suffocating us. Death is the mother of beauty, as Wallace Stevens put it. If we can live, then we can die. If we cannot die, then we cannot live. Peter Thiel can't stand to age or to die, so he can't simply ripen and live. Ripeness is all, remember. But of course, dreams of eternal life, they're not just Peter Thiel. There's this great Keynes quote that's like, perhaps it should be no surprise that the people who did the most to center the heart and essence of our religion on eternal life also did the most for compound interest. So widespread issue, which is just exacerbated by capitalism. And for Peter Thiel, this thwarted life, this death in life, it has a political aspect. His dalliance with Seasteading, his complaints about how we don't have space vacations, his disappointment that we haven't made space colonies yet, these dreams of completely different lives and completely different conditions, why would you have them if you were able to live here and now? But these alternate worlds, alternate lives, they're born out of morbidity, so they just end up morbid. Because to dream of being a spaceman would to dream of being something so separate from this world and this reality that it would be to dream of being a different person, a different existence. And it's not just a personal metamorphosis, right? It's not just a chrysalis pushing out into becoming a butterfly. This would require the destruction of the world. The ultimate dream of Seasteading wasn't just like a separate piece. It was the annihilation of the nation state, which is very cool, but its replacement by like floating corporate states, which is very not cool. And then being a spaceman in a space colony. This is a dream that is pretty common, at least for the last century. This one isn't just Peter Thiel and his libertarian friends, but it's just as morbid. Maybe more so. To push yourself so far away from your life and your place, your Earth. It makes a lot of sense that hopes of space exploration and space colonization reached a cultural saturation point during the Cold War era of mutually assured destruction. Fantasies of space colonization and even just space exploration were often narratively foregrounded by the annihilation of life on Earth, which makes me think that these are, dreams of colonies on Mars weren't just escapes from the dark forebodings of atomic extinction, they were elaborations of them. Take Star Trek, the utopian space future, somewhat automated luxury space communism. The story of Star Trek takes place following a global nuclear war and all the ensuing ecological catastrophe. We couldn't picture a nice, universal, far future without first imagining a horrible, global, near future. The imagination of transformation required the imagination of disaster. There's a deep but unsurprising wisdom to the title of that Norman O. Brown book, Apocalypse/Metamorphosis. To have the metamorphosis, you often need the apocalypse. And thus, Peter Thiel's inability to live his life on Earth leads him to dreams of metamorphosis that would require apocalypse. Dreams that come from morbidity end in morbidity. James Wood wrote a line in an essay about Chekhov. Perhaps the gap between yearning for a new life and yearning for no life at all is small. They might just be the same thing. The apocalypse to Peter Thiel would be welcome if he got to control what came after, Peter Thiel and people like him. But if it's controlled by other people, people not like Peter Thiel, then the apocalypse takes on the aspect of the biblical end times, of Revelations. And the people who could be controlling that unwelcome apocalypse, they become the Antichrist. People talk about recession indicators. I think that AI investment spending might be a depression indicator at the very least. It might signal like a fundamental change to the core mechanics of the global economy itself. For a while after the 2008 crash, the US economy was floated on zero interest rates, sometimes effectively negative rates. And there was simultaneously the further consolidation of the US economy into a few publicly traded like giga corporations. With money kind of like flowing independently into the economy, you didn't really need profits as much. And if you're an executive at one of these publicly traded companies, your real duty is to the shareholders. Your main goal is to raise the stock price. There are very good ways to raise a stock price that have nothing to do with eking out a few more pennies on the profit margin of bath mats. For example, stock buybacks. Use some of the money spilling around the economy to get some of the stocks of your company off the market, and now the remaining stocks held by your remaining shareholders, they're more scarce, and so the price goes up. That was more important than like investing in your company and trying to get an advantage in whatever market you're in. Think about Bed Bath & Beyond. I mean, there's a reason that I came up with bath mats as my example earlier. Bed Bath & Beyond did a massive stock buyback like 18 months before they went bankrupt. Shareholder capitalism disproves the pretext of capitalism. It's not the invisible hand moving you to slowly but surely improve the general welfare by delivering the things that people need and want better than other people have ever done it before. You're delivering to shareholders. Now the invisible hand is pushing you to juice the number on the ticker as high as it'll go. Then the pandemic happened, and the inflation that came after, the inflation that continues. And so now banks had to go back to having interest rates. Money doesn't move around as easily as it used to. At the same time, there have been developments in other economies where now they don't rely on the US dollar as much. You know, normal Chinese capitalists would end up with dollars at the end of the day that they would then invest in like Pasadena real estate, meaning that a lot of the money that we spent on goods made in China eventually made its way back to America. But international firms exist increasingly on the cloud. So America doesn't have to be the primary node of their trade as much anymore. In the 2020s, China introduced a digital currency that you can trade in that doesn't have to be backed at all by American dollars. Because of all these things, you're seeing the beginning of a trickle of economies moving away from dollar dependency. Beginning of de-dollarization. You know, like the BRICS countries. Russia, maybe for obvious reasons, but India, Brazil, and other places, Southeast Asia, Thailand, South Africa, Argentina. There's like 40 countries. There's a whole Wikipedia page devoted to it, which frustratingly, I only discovered when I was fact-checking myself. But yeah, there's like a whole list of countries that are moving away from the dollar. America's tried to stall this by, focusing on China as its, closest rival for becoming the primary node of global capitalism, banning the sale of like the highest power hardware to its cloud companies and to, China in general. But that's a pretty drastic step that just speaks to how dire the situation's already gotten. And I don't know that it's necessarily working. Like, there's a lot of signals that maybe some of the highest power processing units are still getting into China somehow. But even if the ban does work in the short term, it could just lead China to build out their own capacity. And then that's just like one fewer thing that they depend on America for. So yeah, while companies are investing in AI in part because they're run by lamewads who think that it's cool and who think that it'll replace a whole lot of labor and wages, they're also investing in AI because they kind of have to. Companies need to invest in things again. They have to impress shareholders who have expectations of infinitely increasing returns. And so they're promising the creation of a multi-trillion-dollar industry out of thin air. The post-2008 economy is no more. They can't just rely on banks trying to give money away to them anymore. There's a lot of money behind OpenAI and Anthropic, and some of that money did come from banks, but a distressing amount of that money came from other companies like NVIDIA and Microsoft. Companies that, OpenAI and Anthropic, they buy products from NVIDIA and Microsoft using money that was given to them by NVIDIA and Microsoft. Now, like I said earlier, Peter Thiel has a somewhat less pessimistic view of AI, but regardless, the sheer fact that American companies are having to invest billions of dollars into it is a huge shift in the economy. It tells you how destabilized things have gotten. Looking at all of this specifically as a billionaire American investor, it might start to seem like we're getting close to a chasm, like the tires are just starting to edge over the end of the rocks. Jameson has that famous line, right, about how it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. And people sometimes experience the hypothetical end of capitalism as the end of the world. Or at least, if not the end of capitalism, the end of capitalism as we know it, with America as the primary node of global trade. The end of capitalism as we know it, the end of life as we know it. This has actually already happened with Peter Thiel before. In 2008, he wrote an investor letter as, the post-Bretton Woods dispensation was being dissolved. He wrote an investor letter that, imagined that as the apocalypse. But a big difference between that then and now is that then it didn't seem like there was anyone waiting in the wings. There weren't other forces that were, going to take control after the apocalypse. But now there are. So now it's beyond being just a regular old capitalist apocalypse. Now it's an apocalypse populated by candidates for the Antichrist. So that's why Peter Thiel is talking about the Antichrist. That's why he gave his little lectures. And what is he saying about the Antichrist at his lectures? Well, I read the leaks and they're boring. They're so boring. Just twaddle about China, Greta Thunberg, and how AOC might be the harbinger of Armageddon because protecting the environment might stop science from happening. It's just like regular old Fox News stuff, just said less well and with more Carl Schmitt quotes. It's like if you got McDonald's and you just sprinkled expensive salt that you saw on Instagram on top of it. You're still eating McDonald's. I think we underemphasize how much capitalism rewards mediocrity. We talk about how capitalism is evil, as we should, but we don't talk enough about how it's just so middling. Evil has this dark glamour to it. In stories, it's sumptuous and tempting, competent, charismatic. Everyone talks about how, in Paradise Lost, Satan is the best character, and God and Jesus are like snooze time Maximus. Or like Emperor Palpatine in Star Wars, who's this cackling mastermind who single-handedly defeats all of the Jedi at once. All of the good Jedi who are positively soporific. That's not really how evil works in the world. And it's certainly not how evil works in capitalism. Capitalist evil isn't the realm of malevolent geniuses with Sherlock Holmes-style deductive skills. Capitalist evil is wedded to mediocrity. It's wage slavery to make Doritos. We talk about capitalism like it's a ruthless meritocracy, but meritocracy is a system built on readily legible success, excelling in easy to understand ways. But good work, truly fascinating work, is often, by definition, difficult to understand or appreciate. But coming up with an idea that's like 200 years ahead of its time, that would be horrible in capitalism. It's like that line in the story, One Short Sleep Past. If you're 2 steps ahead of everyone else, you're a genius. If you're 3 steps, you're a mad person. A lot of Peter Thiel's wealth, it doesn't come from being a mind-blowing philosopher king. It comes from business people thinking he's a mind-blowing philosopher king. And, if Peter Thiel was saying actually insightful things in like pithy ways, business people simply wouldn't be able to process that. It's precisely because he says mediocre things, just like a elevated affect. That's why he gets rewarded. That's why people give him money to invest. That's why he has the chance to co-invest in other people's companies. That's why people give him credit for being a technologist, even though he's a trained lawyer who just complains about technology. And that's why people pay $200 to see him lecture. The people with $200 to throw away on a hedge fund doofus's lecture are precisely the kind of people who would not be able to stomach a lecture that was somehow actually worth $200. People assume that Peter Thiel is intelligent because he's rich and evil, but it's the opposite. Because he's rich and evil, you should assume that he's a habitual dullard with nothing interesting to say. And you'd be correct. Besides these lectures, I've read a lot of things that Peter Thiel has written or said, and none of it is insightful or memorable or interesting on its own. It might be interesting because he said it. It might be revealing that a billionaire would say something like that. The actual stuff he says is all just really tedious. It's thought-provoking that Peter Thiel is giving lectures on the Antichrist. The actual lectures, though, are not themselves thought-provoking at all. Oh, yeah, China really is a competitor to America. That's true, Peter. If we really tried to go green, that would mean that we'd have to change a lot about our economy. Hmm. The inversion of our mania for endless growth is a horror at stagnation as the beginning of the great catastrophe that will destroy everything. We won't come together to save ourselves or our world because people are just empty and they move around in hordes. Hordes that you hope to direct into your business, but that you fear might start to riot and massacre. Any threat to you or your person, they're blown out to insanely outsized proportions because you dream of eternal life and infinite riches. And so the opportunity costs, they're not a life, a fortune, they're an infinite life, an infinite fortune. Armageddon is the only idea big enough to capture your fear of losing all of that. And this yearning for immortality, it's morbid. It comes from a fear of death. It comes from death. And so it's shaped by death and a concomitant inability to live. You're so frantic about dying that you don't live. So you start to have fantasies of other worlds and other lives that are entirely separate from this one. Other worlds and other lives that would require the annihilation of everything that's here now. The only thing worse than living through the apocalypse would be not living through the apocalypse. The cool apocalypse, where you get to remake everything, not the lame one where China and AOC do. Now, for all that Peter Thiel is a weirdo contrarian, these ways of being and thinking, our world is built on dreams of infinitely compounding returns and seeing other people as Homo sapien shaped automatons for bringing us infinitely compounding returns. Our world comes out of these ugly habits of mind and soul, and it just makes them worse. So, while we all might filter this through different personal obsessions than Peter Thiel does, he's where we're all headed. He's just further along the path than the rest of us. We're all just slowly becoming Peter Thiel. Maybe we should freeze ourselves. Okay, that's the video. Some recommended reading, of course, Life Against Death by Norman O'Brown, especially the section in here about like eternal life and death. But yeah, that Life Against Death, Norman O'Brien, is kind of behind all of my thinking. Another book, Techno-Feudalism by Yanis Varoufakis. That's a great like macro explanation of the last 50 years. I have some quibbles with like some of his like naming conventions, and I think that techno-feudalism is kind of a structure on top of capitalism. You know, it is important, an important shift that like Amazon is trying to own the marketplace for diapers as opposed to just trying to corner the market on diapers. Um, that said, I still, yeah, kind of think it's just, not just, but it is a structure on top of capitalism. And I do have some like, as you saw, some like microeconomic concerns about the structure of the firm that, his like macroeconomic history doesn't, really get into. But nevertheless, that's a great book for understanding the shape of the world right now. And a third book, Palo Alto by Malcolm Harris. It's a great book about the development of Palo Alto and the development of Silicon Valley and how like Silicon Valley ideologies came to be. And a related book that I don't know if I can recommend really is The Contrarian by Max Kafkin, which is a well-reported book. It's a biography of Peter Thiel. It's well-reported, has a lot of helpful information, but I don't know if y'all need to stare into the same abyss that I've been staring into. So read that one at your own peril. I had meant to spend more time bullying and belittling Peter Thiel because I think it's a moral imperative that we have to bully and belittle these people. But the more time I spent thinking about him, the more time I spent learning about him, the more just like unkid and unsettled it felt. It was like looking at the life of this billionaire or any billionaire, it feels like you're studying a mental illness that just hasn't been diagnosed yet. Like being a billionaire should be in DSM-6. I mean, think of the derangement of mind and soul that you have to undergo to make $200 million and then continue to go to work. Which isn't to say that I have any sympathy for Peter Thiel or any of these people, but it's just like, it feels a little bit weird to make fun of them. I still did it, but just a little bit less than I might have expected that I would. Back in like 2015, I think, Damian Lillard was doing this thing called 4-Bar Friday, where he would post 4 bars of rap every Friday. And one week, my 4 bars were inspired by, maybe not about, but inspired by Girard. So my topic for today is mimetic desire, because I want to spit that flow, start a lyrical fire, but I am not good at rapping. That is not a demurral. Just listen to my mouth if you need a referral. So yeah, I've been thinking about Rene Girard for more than a decade at this point. I have a Patreon. I'll put a link in the description. I'm thinking about starting a book club in my Patreon. Just like, a book a month, maybe books that I'm reading for videos or books that we vote on. But yeah, if you're interested in that, follow the link in the description. Like the video, comment, subscribe, send to any. There are Peter Thiel fans out there, which was grim to discover. But yeah, there are Peter Thiel fans. If you know any of these people, feel free to send it to them. Send it out to any of the fellow haters out there. We love the haters. Thanks for watching.